In the early 1990s, the heart of Kenya's economy was bleeding, not from a recession or a drought, but from a phantom, a ghost that was shipping billions of shillings worth of gold and diamonds out of the country. Gold and diamonds that didn't actually exist. A charismatic, 20-something gold dealer with a disarming smile and a plan so audacious it would bring a nation to its knees. But in just a few years, he would siphon more money from his country than most drug lords could dream of. And the most unbelievable part of the story isn't the crime itself, it's what happened after. This is the story of Kamlesh Pattni, the architect of the Goldenberg scandal, a man who nearly single-handedly tanked an entire country's economy. Our story begins not in a boardroom, but on the dusty, frenetic streets of Nairobi. The year is 1990. Kenya is struggling. The government of President Daniel Arap Moi is desperate for foreign currency to pay off international debts. The treasury is running on fumes. Into this crisis walks a young, ambitious Kenyan of Indian descent. His name is Kamlesh Pattni. To his friends, and soon to the corridors of power, he's known simply as Brother Paul. Pattni is a jeweler by trade, but his vision extends far beyond crafting rings and necklaces. He sees an opportunity, a flaw in the system big enough to drive a fleet of armored trucks through. The idea was simple. If you export Kenyan goods, you get a bonus from the government, a kickback paid in foreign currency. It was meant to encourage legitimate business. But Kamlesh Pattni had a different idea. He looked at the law and saw a loophole. The law offered a generous 20% subsidy for the export of precious metals. His plan? To export Kenyan gold and diamonds to a shell company in Dubai, called Solitaire. But there was a problem, a big one. Kenya has almost no gold. It has no diamond mines. For anyone else, this would be a deal-breaker. For Kamlesh Pattni, it was merely a detail. He walked into the office of the director of Kenya's intelligence agency, the Special Branch. The director's name was James Kanyotu. Kanyotu wasn't just a spy. He was one of the most powerful and feared men in the country, the president's right hand. Pattni, this unknown 20-something, laid out his proposal. He would create a company, Goldenberg International, and he would export gold and diamonds on a scale never seen before. He promised to bring in hundreds of millions in precious foreign currency, solving the government's cash crisis overnight. He just needed one thing: the government's blessing, and a little flexibility on the paperwork. Kanyotu, intrigued and perhaps seeing an opportunity for himself, made the introduction. Soon, Kamlesh Pattni was sitting across from the Vice President and Minister for Finance, Professor George Saitoti. Goldenberg International would become the sole exclusive exporter of gold and diamonds from Kenya. In return for this monopoly, Pattni promised to remit at least $50 million a year into the central bank. The government, desperate for cash, didn't just agree. They rolled out the red carpet. They granted Goldenberg International an exclusive license and, crucially, increased the export subsidy from 20% to an unheard of 35%. Pattni now had the keys to the kingdom. He had the political cover, the financial incentive, and the monopoly. The operation began almost immediately. Trucks, supposedly laden with gold bars and uncut diamonds, would arrive at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Customs officials, under strict orders from the top, would wave them through. Paperwork, stamped and signed, would confirm the shipment of millions of dollars worth of precious metals. The documents would travel to the central bank, and like clockwork, Goldenberg International would receive its 35% subsidy payment. Millions upon millions of shillings were being pumped directly from the state treasury into Pattni's accounts. But the trucks were a sham. The cargo manifests were fiction. Investigators would later discover that the crates were often filled with rocks, or were simply empty. Pattni wasn't exporting Kenyan gold. He was exporting nothing at all. He had created a ghost industry. He would file paperwork for a phantom shipment of, say, $100 million worth of gold. The government would then pay him a $35 million subsidy for his efforts. It was a perfect circular fraud. He was being paid for doing nothing. But the money had to come from somewhere, and it was coming from the Central Bank of Kenya. To keep the illusion alive, Pattni needed to show foreign currency flowing into Kenya, as promised. So he took the shillings he was being paid by the government and used them to buy US dollars on the black market. These dollars were then deposited into Goldenberg's accounts at the central bank, completing the cycle. The government saw dollars coming in, not realizing it was their own money, laundered and returned to them at a staggering cost. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity, but it was also a parasite, draining the lifeblood of the nation. For 3 years, from 1991 to 1993, the Goldenberg machine ran nonstop. The numbers are difficult to comprehend. The scheme eventually accounted for nearly 10% of Kenya's entire gross domestic product. It was a shadow economy, run by one man and his political protectors. The amount of money being printed by the central bank to pay Goldenberg its fraudulent claims caused hyperinflation. The Kenyan shilling collapsed. Prices for everyday goods, bread, milk, fuel, skyrocketed. Life savings were wiped out. The country was teetering on the brink of economic ruin. Inside the government, a few brave officials tried to sound the alarm. One was David Munyaki, a mid-level manager at the central bank. He saw the astronomical payments being made to Goldenberg and knew something was deeply wrong. He began to leak documents to opposition politicians, risking everything to expose the rot. Another was a permanent secretary at the Ministry of Finance, who refused to authorize the payments. Pattni was untouchable, shielded by the most powerful men in the land. But no secret lasts forever. By 1993, the scale of the looting was too vast to hide. International lenders like the IMF and the World Bank began asking questions. The media, emboldened by a growing opposition movement, started publishing stories about a massive scandal at the heart of the government. The name Goldenberg was on everyone's lips. The public was furious. They needed a fall guy. And who better than the architect of the scheme himself, the smiling gold dealer Kamlesh Pattni? In 1994, the arrests began. Kamlesh Pattni, along with a handful of senior central bank officials and government figures, was charged with fraud, theft, and corruption. The trial of the century was about to begin. The public expected a swift conviction. They had the documents, the bank statements, the evidence of a nation plundered. They had the man who called himself Brother Paul. But what they didn't have was an understanding of just how deep the rot went. The trial would become a marathon, a 13-year legal odyssey that would outlast governments and defy belief. Pattni, always the showman, played his part to perfection. He wasn't just a defendant, he was a performer. He argued that he wasn't a criminal, but a patriot. He claimed he was working under the direction of the state's intelligence services to bring in much-needed foreign currency during a time of crisis. He wasn't stealing from Kenya, he said. He was saving it. His defense was simple and devastatingly effective. I was just following orders. He implicated everyone. He named names, from the spy chief James Kenyotu to the vice president George Saitoti. He presented documents that appeared to be signed by the highest officials in the land, authorizing his every move. The trial became a political circus. Key witnesses died under mysterious circumstances. Evidence vanished from secure locations. The whistleblower, David Munyaki, who had risked his life to expose the scandal, died in poverty and obscurity before he could see any justice. The prosecution seemed inept, the evidence tangled in a web of political intrigue. Pattni, meanwhile, was undergoing a transformation. The slick businessman began to cultivate a new persona. He announced he had found God. He became a born-again Christian, asking to be called not Brother Paul, but Brother Paul Kamlesh Pattni. He started a church, the Hope International Ministries. He would hold massive prayer rallies, preaching forgiveness and redemption to thousands of followers. He was no longer just a defendant in a fraud case. He was a man of God, a persecuted figure seeking salvation. Then, in 2006, after 13 years of legal battles, the unthinkable happened. The High Court of Kenya dropped all charges against him. The presiding judge ruled that the trial had been an abuse of the court process due to its excessive length. Kamlesh Pattni, the man who had orchestrated a scheme that stole hundreds of millions of dollars and nearly wrecked an entire economy, walked out of the courthouse a free man. There was no conviction, no jail time, no order to repay the money. There was just freedom. The public was stunned. The acquittal was a final, brutal insult to a nation that had been robbed in broad daylight. But for Pattni, it was just the beginning of his third act. He leaned into his new identity as a preacher. His church grew. He produced music videos of himself singing gospel hymns. He presented himself as a victim who had been redeemed by faith. And incredibly, people began to believe him. He leveraged his wealth and newfound religious platform to re-enter the world of influence, not as a gold dealer, but as a peacemaker. He began to travel across Africa, meeting with presidents and warlords. He brokered deals, mediated conflicts. He was photographed alongside leaders in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was appointed a peace ambassador by a collection of religious and civil society groups. The man who had plunged his own country into an economic crisis was now advising other nations on governance and stability. His past seemed to have been erased, replaced by a carefully constructed image of a philanthropist and statesman. In 2013, he took his reinvention a step further. He was baptized and changed his name officially, shedding the identity of Kamlesh Pattni for good. He was now Paul Kamlesh Pattni, but some reports claimed he'd taken on an even grander name, Paul the Apostle. It was the ultimate rebranding. He had gone from criminal mastermind to man of God, from national pariah to international power broker. He settled in Zimbabwe, a country rich in the very diamonds he once pretended to export, and reportedly became a trusted advisor to the government there, operating in the familiar, murky world of precious metals and political influence. The Goldenberg scandal remains an open wound in Kenya. It represents a generation of corruption from which the country has never fully recovered. Most of the powerful figures implicated alongside Pattni died before ever facing a final judgment. But Kamlesh Pattni, or Paul, survived. He didn't just survive, he thrived. His story is a chilling masterpiece of audacity, manipulation, and reinvention. It's a testament to how, with enough money, enough connections, and enough shamelessness, you can craft your own reality. You can steal a fortune, cripple a nation, and then convince the world you're a saint. And the most disturbing question isn't how he did it. It's who will be next.